I often see people talking about how they make a mistake and they feel like, oh, my career as a drummer is over. Like, I'm in high school and I messed up on this one thing and the judges noticed and everyone's going to be mad at me, blah, 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 blah. Everyone I know who's a performer has made mistakes. So like myself personally, I have dropped sticks like on the stick out when doing like a duet, like in front of an audience, and just like, whoop, there goes my sticks. I have completely forgotten an entire drum solo in front of a lot of people, like in the lot. I had my drum fall off my carrier and even had my carrier break during a performance. So I had to like hold it while I was like attempting to play and like finish off what we were doing. I had a timpani piece during my recital where it was an audio recording that I was playing along to. So it had a bunch of extra like synthesized sounds and I was playing timpani on top of that. We did a sound check with that one and the person who was running it hit pause rather than hit stop. So when we started and we hit play for me to start the piece, it started several measures into it when every single measure at the beginning was a completely different time signature. So I had to like improvise and be like, I have no idea where we're at in the music. And then I had to like be able to jump back in and go, okay, this is where I think we're at. In college, somebody didn't show up to play a snare solo for a concert snare drum with a large ensemble in a performance. So I had to sight read a snare part and it was all in 4/4 until the very last couple of lines. There was a random 3/4 bar. And so I'm reading this like complicated thing. Like I'm actually doing a great job with it. I'm like so happy that I work on sight reading every single day, but I missed the 3/4 bar and I screwed up the timing of something right before a caesura, which means that the entire ensemble, everybody stopped playing, and I played a rim shot that should have been basically a beat before that on the release, right before the caesura. So many other stories I could tell you of other people screwing up. I've seen some people who forgot a solo in front of the entire school of music, in front of hundreds of students and staff members. They tried restarting, forgot again, tried restarting, forgot again. They just bowed, walk off stage. I've seen drummers on drumline trip and roll out of their drums and out of their carrier during a competition for a band day. I've seen people who have tripped while performing and have caused a cascade of tripping on the field because their drum fell off and it caused one person who's marching backwards to fall. That caused the next person to fall, and it was like a domino of falling at a performance. I've seen a person who had a panic attack mid-performance. Instead of marching with the rest of the ensemble, they marched off the field because they were having a pretty big panic attack. I've seen people who have forgotten what they were playing while on the jumbo screen in front of a stadium full of people at a baseball stadium while it was like literally zoomed in on him and he's just kind of like, Everybody makes mistakes. If you are the kind of person who makes mistakes and you're like, oh no, I just ruined this band day or this drumline competition for everybody, blah, blah, blah. It's okay. It happens to everybody. Just learn to recover from it. Don't beat yourself up over it. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. To be candid, when I started streaming these like drum practice streams, there's like now almost 300 of them up on my YouTube. I like legit was having severe anxiety when I first started because I had never practiced publicly before. I had only for decades performed something I'd rehearsed for a very long time, showed publicly something I had spent a long time working on. So when I started sharing like, here's how I practice stuff, and it's like all the dirt, all the bad stuff, all the things that I need to refine, etc. It legitimately was difficult for me. Like I had like a panic attack and like, just like, okay, I gotta be able to work through this. I'm like live on stream. I don't want to screw up. Even when I was just playing through the stick control while just warming up there, it's like I wouldn't have shared any one of those on social media because they weren't up to my standard, because I'm literally just getting my hands going. One of the things that I actually recommend people doing is spending about 10 to 20% of your time pushing yourself to play something harder than you can. So for example, if you are on drumline, you can practice these like chop exercises like at the top of the screen right here. Let's say your skill level is like at a 5 right now, like out of 10. These chop exercises might be like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 in difficulty. If you push your hands and your brain to think a little bit faster and play something more difficult than you currently can, this will make it so that you can progress over time. So while I recommend the majority of your time you work on your technique by like working on grid variations with rudiments or working on any of these technique exercises and whatnot, it is very beneficial to also push yourself to be able to play something that is more challenging than you currently can. So for example, when I was working on marimba, I would play stuff that I was comfortable with, but I'd also learn pieces that were more difficult than I could play typically. And that would teach me some new concepts that I need to learn and show me some of the gaps that I needed to fill yourself with some practice to be able to get to that next level. So if all you do is sit with what you're comfortable with and not practice the things you are uncomfortable with, you won't necessarily be able to make that progress, and you might end up hitting a plateau with your own performing that's often very difficult to get away from, because you just like sit there and then you're just stuck at that level because you're not pushing yourself with that 10 to 20% of your time to be able to play faster or to play something more difficult than you can comfortably play right now. The drumline was not doing a very good job at staying in tempo. So one of the ways that you can actually practice this is with the Vic Firth isolation headphones. It makes it so that you can hear audio like a metronome or music or whatever, and you can still hear your playing, but it's like dampened, as opposed to like isolation headphones where like the earbuds that like zero out the sound basically, then you won't be able to hear your playing if you have really good isolation headphones. If you give that to the center snare and they're the only ones who can hear the met, as opposed to using like a Dr. Beat where everyone can hear it, it forces the drum line to just listen to the center snare. Then you only have to fix one person who might be rushing or dragging, as opposed to focusing on the whole line and say, hey, you're rushing, you're dragging, you're rushing, you're dragging, etc. You just say, hey, center snare, I need you to not drag in this moment, and everybody listens then to them and they will fix it. If you want to work on improving your left hand, any of these exercises, whether it's chop stuff or the technique stuff or the grid variations or whatever, and play it off of the left. Start with that. So if you see sticking where it starts on the right, play it off the left. You can also just sit there and work on stuff. We are working on isolating out just one hand at a time. So for example, if you play these timing exercises, you could play this all on one hand. But what you want to do is like work on this in conjunction with the other hand. So the actual best thing that I recommend doing, instead of just only working on the left or only doing things off the left, which is what you'll hear with most people, is work on stuff as double stops. So this particular playlist right here has a bunch of exercises in it that do right, left, both. And the reason for that is because you want to work on stuff in isolation so you can refine your technique with your right hand, then your left hand. And then the double stops makes it so you can hear whether or not they sound the same, because ideally you want your hands to be even. So if you're playing a double stop and it sounds like a flam, whether you're playing like a rhythm like that and it gets that weird, instead of like a popping sound, that's how you can work on it to try and balance things out. So not only are you working on like the rhythmic balance, but you're also working on the velocity balance. So are you playing in a way that your hands are moving at the same speeds, etc.? There's an advantage playing with a computer because it's always going to be rhythmically the exact same way. Whereas if you're listening in on a snare line, the person on the inside of you might be inconsistent with their playing. They might slur out their diddles, they might rush their diddles, they might not play the underlying check pattern in time, etc. So if you practice listening to something like this, then you're at least practicing with perfect interpretation. So it's a little bit easier than with a metronome where you have all this space in between each one of the beats, and what happens in between might be a little bit wonky. But if you're playing with a play along that actually fills in all the notes, and you can hear every single one of the notes in between and get that interpretation down. When I was a computer science educator, I taught in a computer lab where the floors was like that, like linoleum. It was like very smooth, and they had these rolly chairs, and kids would all the time fall out of their chairs, like just completely fall over, fall onto the back. Never injured or anything like that. So it was hilarious. So what I would do is whenever that would happen is I'd just go over to the whiteboard and just put a tally on the whiteboard. And I had like different like grade levels or classes and whatnot up there, and they never knew what the tallies were for. They would always be like, what's the tallies for? And I would just be like, don't worry about it. Just keeping track of something. But there'd be like 20 tallies next to like one class. Oh, today was a good day. We got 5 kids falling over in their chairs.